I thought my husband was simply exhausted from a brutal week at work. I thought the tension that had been coiling through our house like smoke for the past 3 months was just the byproduct of his new promotion, the pressure of bigger responsibilities, the weight of a corner office he'd spent years clawing toward. I made excuses for his coldness the way you pull a blanket tighter against a draft, instinctively, automatically, not yet ready to admit that the cold was coming from inside the house itself. But when Daniel grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bracelet of bruises, when he screamed, "Go cry to your daddy!" with a contempt so raw and ancient it seemed to have been waiting years for its moment, when he threw my overnight bag onto the snow-dusted porch and locked the door behind me with a click that sounded like a sentence being handed down, I understood with a devastating full-body clarity that this had never been exhaustion. This had been a plan. He stood at the frosted window for a moment, silhouetted by the warm, amber glow of the home I had poured myself into, the home my father's money had helped us buy, the home Daniel had spent the last 6 months quietly, methodically trying to steal. His posture was victorious, shoulders back, chin lifted, the stance of a man who believed he had just won something. He had no idea that the woman stumbling barefoot through the snow toward the street was not defeated. She was dialing, and the man who answered was Richard Bell. Part 1. The Life We Built, and the Lie It Rested On. To understand what happened that December night, you have to understand what came before it. Not just the months of warning signs I rationalized away, but the years of ordinary happiness that made the betrayal so surgically cruel. Because that is the particular genius of a slow-building deception. It uses the good times as camouflage. Every warm memory becomes a question mark in retrospect. Every tender moment gets re-examined like evidence at a crime scene. Our house on Elmwood Lane in the western suburbs of Boston had been my idea of perfect. Not grand, not showy, but deeply honestly home. A 2-story colonial with cream siding that caught the late afternoon light and turned it gold. A wraparound porch where I'd spent 3 summer weekends, hanging globe string lights and potting cascading ferns in terracotta planters. A kitchen with wide oak countertops I'd sanded and oiled myself the first month we moved in. The woodsy scent of linseed oil lingering for days. The refrigerator was covered in magnets from places we'd traveled. Portland, Savannah, a ridiculous lobster magnet from the Cape. The hallway had a row of framed photos. Our wedding under oak trees wound with fairy lights, a hiking trip to the White Mountains where Daniel had carried me piggyback for the last mile because my boots had given me blisters, a blurry selfie from New Year's Eve 2 years ago, both of us flushed and laughing. I'd built that home the way my mother taught me to, with intention and care, with the belief that a space could hold a marriage together the way a frame holds a painting. Mom had died when I was 12, a swift and merciless cancer that took her in 4 months and left my father and me rattling around in a house that still smelled of her perfume for years afterward. Dad never remarried. He channeled his grief into Bell Tech, the software company he'd started in the garage, and into raising me with a kind of quiet, steady devotion that I only fully appreciated as an adult. He came to every school play, every graduation, every stumble. He never gave advice unless asked, and when asked, he gave it precisely and without sentimentality. He was the most capable man I had ever known, and also the most gentle. A combination so rare that I suppose I spent most of my adult life looking for echoes of it in the men I dated. Daniel seemed at first to carry some of that same quality. We met at the Tech Innovators Conference in Seattle 4 years before the night in question, a glittering industry event held in a convention center overlooking Elliott Bay. I was 28, fresh from finishing my master's in business analytics at MIT, working as a senior project manager at a mid-sized consulting firm in Boston. Daniel was 32, a regional sales manager at Corvell Industries, the enterprise software company that had emerged in the last decade as a legitimate rival to what Bell Tech had once been. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, impeccably suited in navy, with a quick laugh and a way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. We talked for 3 hours over cocktails and conference hors d'oeuvres, crisp bruschetta, prosciutto wrapped melon, everything slightly too salty the way conference food always is, and I missed the panel I'd specifically flown to Seattle to attend. He'd said, early in that first conversation, "Your father is Richard Bell, isn't he? Bell Tech." Not a question, really. More of an accounting. "He is," I said. "Impressive legacy." A pause, a sip of his drink. Must be a strange thing to live up to. I'd taken it as sensitivity, as empathy for the pressure of a remarkable parent. Only years later would I understand it as something closer to the first move in a chess game I didn't know we were playing. We dated long distance for 6 months, flights between Boston and Seattle, phone calls that lasted until one of us fell asleep, weekend trips to places neither of us had been. He relocated to Boston when Corvell expanded their Eastern Division and asked him to manage it. We moved in together into a shared apartment in Cambridge, and a year later, under those oak trees at a vineyard outside Concord, we married. The ceremony was small and perfect. 40 people, wildflower bouquets, vows we wrote ourselves, a string quartet playing something achingly beautiful as the late afternoon light turned the vineyard rose to copper and gold. Dad walked me down the aisle and squeezed my hand at the altar. He shook Daniel's hand with a look I can only describe now as measured, warm but watching. "Take care of her," he said. "Always," Daniel promised. He didn't mean it, or perhaps he did then. And somewhere in the years that followed, the ambition curdled, the resentment hardened, and the man who made that promise was quietly replaced by someone who saw my father's name not as history, but as a threat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the first 2 years, our marriage was genuinely, uncomplicated happy. We had routines that felt like rituals. Mornings, the coffee maker gurgling to life at 6:30, the scent of dark roast curling through the bedroom, Daniel in the kitchen in his gray sweatshirt, humming tunelessly while I showered, the two of us at the breakfast table with yogurt parfaits and the newspaper. He took the business section, I took arts and culture. We swapped after 20 minutes. Evenings, the walk from the tea stop together when our schedules aligned, dinner cooked collaboratively with the kitchen radio on, wine poured while onions sautéed in butter and garlic, the hiss and pop of it filling the air. Weekends, farmers markets, long drives with the windows down, Sunday dinners at Dad's where he and Daniel would watch the game while I helped Dad in the kitchen, the three of us eating at the big oak table that had been in the family since my mother's parents immigrated from Ireland. Daniel and Dad were never close, but they were cordial. Dad was generous with Daniel in the quiet, practical ways he was generous with everyone. A connection here, a recommendation there. When Daniel was passed over for a regional promotion 2 years into our marriage, Dad had made a single phone call to a former business contact now sitting on Corvell's advisory board. The promotion happened 2 weeks later. Daniel had been grateful, effusive even, but I remember catching something flicker in his expression when he thanked Dad, something that looked, just briefly, like humiliation dressed in a suit. I should have paid more attention to that flicker. Part 2. The promotion and the poison. It poured. The promotion to regional director of Corvell's Eastern Division arrived on a Tuesday in September, delivered via a call from the CEO himself while Daniel was in the shower. I heard him answer from the bathroom, his voice climbing an octave before he stepped out, dripping, towel around his waist, eyes wide and shining. "I got it," he said. "The directorship. Claire, I got it." I screamed. I actually screamed, threw my arms around his still wet shoulders, felt his laugh vibrate through his chest. We were ridiculously purely happy for approximately 12 hours. I ordered lobster rolls from the Harbor Seafood Shack we'd gone to on our first Boston date, chilled a bottle of Veuve Clicquot I'd been saving for an occasion worth it, and we danced barefoot in the living room to Glenn Miller records at midnight, his hand on my waist, both of us slightly dizzy with champagne and possibility. "We did it," he kept saying, and the "we" felt so real, so solid, so entirely genuine that I tucked it away like a keepsake. By the following weekend, the locks on his home office had been changed. "Confidential client files," he said, drilling the new hardware with a focus that seemed excessive. The directorship comes with NDAs. Can't be too careful." "Of course," I said. But standing in the hallway listening to the drills whine, I felt a small, cold thing settle in my chest. Not suspicion yet, just awareness. A shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm you can't name. Over the following weeks, Daniel changed in ways that were difficult to articulate precisely because each individual change was so minor. He began coming home late. Not dramatically late, but consistently 45 minutes past when he'd said, with no explanation beyond, "meeting ran over." He stopped asking about my work, my projects, the colleagues I'd mentioned often enough that he should have known their names. At dinner, his phone sat face up beside his plate, screen intermittently lighting, and he'd glance at it mid-sentence with a look that told me whoever was texting was more important than whatever I was saying. When I pointed it out once, gently over pasta he'd barely touched, he set the phone face down with an exasperated sigh. "I'm the director of an entire division now, Claire. I have responsibilities. Can we do this another time?" This meaning the conversation where I asked to be treated like I existed, but I let it go. I smoothed it over. I told myself he was adjusting to the pressure and that the adjustment was temporary. Then came the first money discrepancy. I managed our household finances, a task I'd taken over early in our marriage because I was, frankly, better at it. My analytics background making budgets feel like puzzles rather than chores. We maintained a joint account for household expenses and individual accounts for personal spending, a clean and functional system. In October, reviewing the joint account before paying bills, I noticed a pattern. Small withdrawals, $200 to $800, categorized as business expenses, across 4 separate weeks. Not alarming in isolation, but the pattern bothered me. I cross-referenced the dates with the credit card Daniel used for legitimate work reimbursements. They didn't match. That evening, I laid my laptop open on the kitchen table, spreadsheet glowing, and waited for him to come home. He arrived in a better mood than usual, flushed, almost exhilarated, as though he'd won something, and stopped short when he saw my expression in the laptop. "What's this?" "Can you explain these withdrawals?" I turned the screen toward him. October 4th, 8th, 15th, 22nd joint account, not on the card statement. He leaned over, brow furrowing in a pantomime of confusion that I now recognize for exactly what it was. Performance. Cash for client entertainment. Restaurants that don't take cards. You know how the older clients are. Which clients? You could just expense them. Jesus, Claire. He straightened, jaw tightening. I'm managing a division. I can't expense every dinner. Looks bad. I'll reimburse the joint account from my bonus. Can we not do this? The exasperation was so convincing that I closed the laptop. I told myself it was reasonable. I told myself I was being paranoid, the word he reached for whenever I asked questions he didn't want to answer, and which I should have long since stopped accepting. 2 nights later, I found the receipt. I was checking coat pockets for a lost earring, a pearl drop my mother had given me, small enough to fall through pocket lining, when my fingers brushed paper in Daniel's winter coat hung by the door. I unfolded it under the hallway light. $2,500 wire transfer to Hargrove Legal Associates. Specialty: asset protection, estate planning, prenuptial amendments. I stood there for a long time with the receipt in my hand, the house quiet around me, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking its patient count. Hargrove, his mother's maiden name, before she'd remarried and divorced and returned to it. Was this Evelyn's firm, or one she'd recommended? Why was he paying an asset protection attorney $2,500 out of an account I didn't know about? Over dinner, I was deliberate. I set the receipt beside his plate without comment and waited. He looked at it, looked at me, and smiled, the particular smile of a man recalibrating quickly. "Smart couples plan ahead," he said. "With the directorship, my assets are more exposed. Liability, lawsuits from clients, standard stuff. Why didn't you mention it?" "Didn't want to bore you with the details." "We share finances, Daniel." "We share a joint account," he said, tone shifting to something fractionally colder. "I have a right to my own planning." Pause. Don't make this something it isn't. And there it was, the gentle undermining. Don't make this something it isn't. You're overthinking. You're paranoid. The language of a man who has decided that his wife's instincts are an obstacle to be managed, not a person to be heard. I didn't sleep well that night, or the night after. Part 3. Evelyn, the architect in floral perfume. Evelyn Hargrove was, in the most precise possible sense, a piece of work. She was 66, twice divorced, living in a spotless bungalow in Framingham that she maintained with the obsessive tidiness of someone who'd lost control of everything else. She wore floral prints in every season, kept her silver hair set in careful waves, and distributed her love for Daniel with the possessiveness of someone who viewed their child's marriage as a hostile acquisition. I had understood this about her from the first holiday we spent together, Thanksgiving. 2 years into our relationship, the turkey carved at her dining table with its lace cloth and centerpiece of dried flowers, the scent of roasting meat mingling with her perfume, rose and jasmine layered so thick it felt like wearing a costume. "You're lucky, you know," she'd said, passing the cranberry sauce with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My Daniel has always had women after him, smart women, driven women, but he chose you." A beat. That loyalty is rare. I'd thanked her, uncertain whether I'd been complimented or warned. Over the years, she'd never warmed to me in any organic way. Her affection was conditional, transactional, and always subtly oriented toward extracting information. She asked about my salary with a directness that made guests at holiday tables uncomfortable. She wanted to know who owned the house. Both of us, I said, though Dad's down payment contribution technically complicated that. What would happen to it if something terrible happened? Nothing was going to happen, Evelyn. Whether I'd considered putting Daniel's name first on the deed for simplicity. Her questions about our finances felt like a slow, patient audit. Daniel defended her with the reflexive loyalty of a man who has been conditioned to believe that his mother's love is the only kind he can wholly rely on. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say. "She worries." And I, wanting to be the kind of wife who didn't cause conflict about his family, accepted this characterization even as the evidence accumulated. After the promotion, her calls increased. I'd come downstairs late at night for water and hear his voice from the office. "The papers are almost ready." "No, she doesn't know about the trust. I told you she's oblivious about anything financial that doesn't have a spreadsheet attached." "I'll handle it, Mom." "Yeah, he's out of the picture. Bell's retired. He's not watching." He's not watching. I knew, in the place in the body where you know things before you can prove them, that these conversations were about me, about our house, about money. But I was still hoping I was wrong. One Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before everything detonated, I came home unexpectedly early. My afternoon client meeting had been postponed, and I'd decided to work from home. Daniel's car was in the driveway, unusual for 2 p.m. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled of Evelyn's perfume, cloying and floral, hanging in the air like a declaration. I set my bag down quietly on the entry bench, the way you do when you're not sure what you're about to walk into. Their voices came from behind the office door, not shouting, not arguing, but the low, purposeful register of people who believe themselves alone. "Evelyn, the amendment transfers the house, the joint savings, and the vested portion of the 401k to your irrevocable trust. One signature. Once that's done, you file, and she gets nothing that isn't documented as premarital." A pause. "Daniel, she'll fight it." "Evelyn, letter. By the time any lawyer reviews it, you'll have changed accounts, and the house transfer will have cleared the waiting period. And honestly, she won't even get a good attorney. Who does she call? Daddy? Richard Bell is done, Daniel. Nobody at Corvell fears him anymore. The board hates him. Old rivalry runs deep. He has no leverage." Daniel quieter. "She'll call him anyway." Evelyn dismissive. "And what will he do? He's 63 years old and retired. He has golf and a workshop. Claire is sensitive, emotional. She'll spend 2 weeks crying and another 2 second-guessing herself. By then it's over. You take the assets, the directorship, the apartment in the Back Bay." "The apartment?" My voice came out of my mouth before I had consciously decided to speak. Silence. Complete. crystalline, devastating. The office door opened. Evelyn appeared first, color draining from her face before reconstructing itself into a mask of injured composure. Daniel stood behind her, and the expression on his face was not guilt, or not primarily guilt. It was something colder, the look of a man calculating how much I'd heard and what it would cost him. "Claire," Evelyn said, I heard you." Voice completely steady. Something had happened inside me in those 3 seconds of silence. Something closed, something sealed. The place where hope and benefit of the doubt had lived was gone, replaced by a cold and merciless clarity. "I heard everything. You misunderstood. I have a master's in business analytics, Evelyn." I looked at her directly. I understood every word. I walked back to the entry, picked up my bag, and left. Drove to a coffee shop 4 miles away, sat in the corner booth with a cappuccino I didn't drink, and spent 90 minutes in my journal. Every date, every withdrawal, every overheard phrase, every receipt, every locked door, evidence, architecture. When I came home that evening, Daniel was in the kitchen making dinner, cheerful in a way that was almost demented, as though the afternoon hadn't happened. Evelyn was gone. He'd laid the table with placemats, opened a bottle of Merlot. "I thought we'd have a quiet evening," he said. "Sure," I said. We ate in near silence, and he seemed satisfied by my quiet as compliance, my stillness as forgiveness. He had no idea it was neither. Part 4. The night he threw me out, every detail. The Thursday that broke everything arrived gray and hostile, sleet pattering the windows since morning, the sky a low, featureless ceiling. I'd worked from home, distracted, replaying Evelyn's words. "She's oblivious, she's emotional. Richard is done." I'd emailed Harlan Voss, my father's attorney of 20 years, a precise and relentless man who had navigated Beltec's legal landscape through its most turbulent years, asking for a consultation. Tentative, preliminary, just information, just in case. Daniel had a major pitch that day. A Fortune 500 client Corvell had been courting for 18 months, a deal that would have been his largest as director. I knew about it because he'd mentioned it twice over breakfast the previous week, his excitement barely contained. I'd wished him luck both mornings with genuine warmth, because despite everything I knew and suspected, some part of me still held the shape of the marriage we'd been, still wanted the good outcome. He came home at 9:17 p.m. I know the time because I noted it afterward in the journal, the journalist's instinct to timestamp everything. The door opened with a bang that knocked the key hook off the wall, a small painted ceramic hook my mother had made. I heard it hit the floor from the kitchen where I stood at the stove, stirring chicken soup, thin, fragrant, with thyme and butter and soft carrots, the kind of thing that felt like armor against whatever was coming. The sound of his footsteps was wrong, heavy, irregular, slightly dragging. The Scotch smell preceded him into the kitchen like a herald. He looked terrible. Tie yanked loose and hanging askew, jacket collar crumpled, face flushed and uneven crimson, eyes glazed and furious. He dropped his briefcase on the counter with a crash that sent a stack of mail sliding to the floor and didn't look at it. "Rough day," I said. Not quite a question, a careful offering. "Don't." Flat. Absolute. I turned the burner lower. "Do you want to sit? Soup's almost ready." "I don't want soup." He moved to the cabinet, reached past me for a glass, filled it from the Scotch bottle on the counter, nearly full that morning, now less than a third. "You know what I want? I want one day, one single day where I don't have to carry everyone else while everyone whispers about Richard Bell's son-in-law." I kept my voice even. Who was whispering? He turned, and the look in his eyes was something I hadn't seen before or hadn't allowed myself to name before. Hatred. Specific, targeted, and old. Lost the pitch. Cartwright went with another firm. Know what his reason was? Looking for a more established relationship, his assistant told Mark in confidence. The glass came down on the counter so hard the Scotch jumped. You know what established relationship is code for in this industry? Old money connection. Bell legacy. Your father's shadow is so damn long it's still blocking my light, and he hasn't been in the building in 5 years. Daniel, don't tell me what that is, pointing. You have no idea what it's like. You walk into any room in this city and people know your father built something real. What do I have? A promotion that half the board thinks was courtesy of a phone call your father made. That landed. He made one call, 2 years ago. One call. He laughed, ugly. One call from Richard Bell, and suddenly I'm director. Great, fantastic. My whole career courtesy of my wife's daddy. He drained the glass. I'm done with it, Claire. Done with you. Done with the arrangement. Done with this whole pretend marriage where you get to be the charity princess and I'm the charity groom. I set the ladle down deliberately, turned to face him fully. Pretend marriage, I repeated. Don't act wounded. You've been living off connections and inheritance since before you met me. Your father buys your way through life and you call it merit. He did not buy the down payment on this house. He gestured arms wide, taking in the kitchen, the home, the life. Don't pretend. He helped us, both of us, and you thanked him, because I had to. He was shouting now, voice filling the kitchen, bouncing off tile and glass, because that's what you do when someone's holding your future hostage. You smile and you thank him and you hate every second of it. Something in me went absolutely, preternaturally still. Later, I would think of it as the stillness before the figure steps in front of the train. You don't mean that, I said quietly. I mean every word. He set the glass down, stepped closer. Go cry to your daddy, Claire. That's what you do. That's all you know how to do. I reached for the ladle again, something to hold, some mundane object to anchor me to sanity, and his hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Not my hand, my arm. The upper forearm gripping hard enough that my fingers went instantly numb, hard enough that the ladle clattered out of my hand and hit the stove, hot soup spattering the counter, burning my wrist. I pulled back sharply, the momentum sending me into the counter, my elbow catching the vase of dried lavender I kept on the windowsill. It exploded on the floor, shards of terracotta, scattered purple sprigs, a cloud of dried, floral scent rising like a ghost. The sound of it seemed to clarify something in him. The rage, which had been hot and chaotic, settled into something colder and more deliberate. He looked at me against the counter, at the shattered vase, at the soup-spattered stove. His expression went smooth. "Get out," he said. "Daniel, get out of my house." He turned and walked down the hall with a purposefulness that was more frightening than any shouting. I heard the closet door, the drag of something being pulled from the top shelf. He came back with my navy overnight bag and began stuffing it with whatever was at hand. A sweater, jeans, my phone charger pulled from the wall. He moved with the efficient absence of feeling of a man who has been planning this moment and is relieved it's finally arrived. "Stop it," I said. "You are not serious." "Dead serious." He zipped the bag, picked it up, walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air flooded in, carrying the bite of snow and wind. "Daniel." I was still in the kitchen, disbelieving. "It's 9 o'clock at night. It's December. You cannot—" "Go." He set the bag on the porch, held the door, eyes level, cold, finished. "Go back to your daddy. Tell him his princess needs rescuing again." I walked to the door. I don't know what I expected, that the sight of me actually leaving would break through something, reach some remaining remnant of the person who'd vowed in the vineyard to always. He watched me step onto the porch. The cold hit like a wall. Temperature in the low 20s, wind gusting, fresh snow dusting the porch boards and catching the light. My slippers, soft-soled indoor, utterly useless, sank into the powder on the steps. "My keys," I said, "my coat, my wallet." "Purse is in the bag." He nodded at the overnight case. "Keys stay here. It's my house. Our house. My name's on the mortgage." The first hint of satisfaction crept into his voice, and I understood. He'd been waiting to say that. He'd rehearsed it. "My name's on the deed. Get off my property." The door closed. The lock turned. Through the frosted sidelights, his shape moved away into the amber interior, unhurried, back to his life. I stood on the porch for perhaps 20 seconds, long enough for the cold to move from uncomfortable to dangerous, for my hands to go from cold to numb, for the sheer surreal magnitude of what was happening to imprint itself on my nervous system like a brand. Then I picked up the bag, fished out my phone with fingers that had already lost dexterity, and walked off the porch into the snow. 4 blocks. No coat, no proper shoes, just the bag and the phone and the cold and the growing bruise around my arm where his fingers had been. I called a cab at the corner, standing under the halo of a street lamp while wind tore at my hair, and when the driver pulled up and I got in, he looked at my feet and then my face and handed me the packaged emergency Mylar blanket from his glove compartment without a word. I held it around my shoulders and typed my father's address. I didn't cry in the cab. I was too far past crying for that. What I felt was something harder and more useful, the particular cold fury of a woman who has been patient for too long, who has made too many excuses, who has chosen gentleness in a situation that required armor, and who has just received irrefutable proof that the gentleness was weaponized against her. I pulled out my journal. I kept a small one in every bag I owned, and by the time the cab turned onto Dad's street, I had 2 pages of notes. Dates, quotes, events, everything Harlan would need. I had stopped being a wife the moment that lock clicked. I had started being a witness. Part 5. My father. The man everyone underestimated. Dad opened the door 9 seconds after I rang. He must have been in the living room, close to the front, or perhaps some frequency of distress carried through walls, the ancient parental radar. He was in his robe, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a paperback of Patrick O'Brien held loosely in one hand, and his face went through 3 distinct expressions in 2 seconds when he saw me. Relief, I was alive. Assessment, I was hurt. And a controlled rage that settled so quietly and completely, it was more frightening than anything Daniel had managed all night. "Come here," he said, and held the door wide. Inside, the familiar smell of his house. Leather-bound books, sawdust from his workshop, the faint residue of the cedar logs he kept in the fireplace, wrapped around me like a second blanket. He took the overnight bag without asking, set it by the stairs, and steered me to the living room with a hand on my shoulder. "Sit. I'll get tea." "Dad, tea first, then talk." He disappeared to the kitchen, and I heard the tap, the kettle, the deliberate clink of cups. The sound of a man giving himself 90 seconds to decide how he was going to respond to whatever he was about to hear. He came back with chamomile. I'd hated it as a child, but he'd made it for me every time I'd been sick or frightened throughout my life, and the scent of it now was as comforting as a code word. He sat in the armchair across from me, reading glasses removed now, and looked at me with the full, unhurried attention that was one of his particular gifts. I told him everything. Not just that night. Everything. The withdrawal discrepancies, the receipt, the legal firm, the locked office, the late-night calls, Evelyn's voice through the door. She's oblivious. Richard is done. By the time she lawyers up, it's over. The amendment that would have transferred our home, our savings, my retirement contributions to Daniel's irrevocable trust. The arm grab, the shards of terracotta and lavender on the kitchen floor, the door closed and locked, the snow. I laid it out clinically, completely, because somewhere in those 4 blocks I had decided that I was done with the particular female habit of softening the edges of the story to make the listener more comfortable. The truth was ugly and precise, and I delivered it that way. When I finished, Dad sat quiet for a moment. He looked at the bruise on my arm, fully formed now, a deep purple-green shadow wrapping my forearm, for long enough that I could see what it was costing him to remain still. "He touched you," he said. Statement, not question. "Yes." Another moment of quiet. Then, "He's at Corvell Eastern. Victor Alden is still CEO." He was thinking, ordering information, the way he always had, as a problem to be solved with the right application of the right resources. "Dad, I don't want you to—" "I know what you want, sweetheart. Gentle, but absolute. And I know what I owe you. Those are 2 different calculations, and I'm running both. He picked up his phone, an old iPhone, screen cracked in one corner, the kind of benign technological carelessness possible when you've already sold the company, and dialed without searching. He knew the number by heart. The call lasted 4 minutes. His voice was quiet, unhurried, as precise as a surgeon. "Victor, it's Richard. Sorry for the late call. I know. Yes, listen. Your new Eastern RD, Daniel Hargrove. He's my son-in-law. Was my son-in-law." A brief pause. "We need to talk about the Q4 expense invoices. Ghost vendors. I think you'll find the pattern clearly once your audit team looks at it. And the Cartwright pitch he lost today? The bid package. Check whether any of those figures were manipulated. I have reason to believe there's a pattern. I can send you what I have." Another pause. Longer. No urgency on my part. The urgency is yours. Whoever's running internal audit, yes. Tomorrow morning would be appropriate. He thanked Alden and hung up. The second call was to Harlan Voss. Shorter. "Harlan, Richard, I need a full workup on Daniel Hargrove. Financial, legal, anything connected to an entity called Hargrove Legal Associates. His mother, Evelyn, may be involved. Priority, discretion." "Yes, thank you." He set the phone face down on the end table and looked at me. "Go shower, take your old room. Everything else happens tomorrow." I showered until the hot water ran out, standing under the spray until my fingers wrinkled and the cold left my bones, staring at the tile until the adrenaline drained away and left something cleaner in its place. Dried off with the huge, faded bathroom towels Dad had owned since I was small. Climbed into the twin bed in my childhood room under the same green and white quilt my grandmother made. The same glow-in-the-dark star stickers on the ceiling, faint now, almost gone, that had been my night sky through childhood fevers and teenage heartbreaks. I didn't sleep. I lay on my back and thought, with the preternatural clarity that comes after a threshold has been crossed, about the specific shape of what had just happened and what I intended to do about it. Not could do, intended. There is a meaningful difference. By 3 a.m., I had a list. Part 6, the morning the world rearranged itself. At 6:15 a.m., my phone began its assault. I'd set it face down on the nightstand, but felt the first vibration and lay still, watching the ceiling. 4 missed calls before 6:30, then texts. "Claire, I'm sorry. That was completely out of hand. Please come home. We can talk." 3 minutes later, "I love you. I was drunk and stupid. Please." Then, "Where are you? Are you at your dad's?" Then a gap of 12 minutes, then a different quality of message entirely. "Something's happening at work. HR called. Please call me." I made myself wait until the 10th call before answering. Let it ring 4 times. Picked up on the 5th. "What?" Not a question. "Claire." His voice was rawer than I'd ever heard it, rougher than the scotch and the shouting. This was the sound of real panic, the kind that bypasses performance entirely. They suspended me. Just 2 HR people showed up at the office at 6 a.m. with my direct supervisor and the head of internal audit. My access is revoked. Company card is deactivated. They took my laptop. They're citing fraud investigation. "Claire, your father. He called someone, didn't he? He called Alden. This is him. Please. Tell him to back off. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." I said nothing. Listened to him breathe. "Claire, please." I was drunk. I would never actually have filed the amendment. It was just a backup plan, just security. I wasn't going to hurt you. I need you to believe. "You grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises," I said. "You threw me out of my home at 9 at night in December without my coat or my keys. You told me to go cry to my daddy." A pause. "So I did. Turns out I made the right call." "Claire, don't call this number again." I hung up. At 7:58 a.m., the first business news alert arrived. Corvell Industries suspends regional director amid internal fraud investigation. Sources point to expense misappropriation, bid manipulation. By 9 a.m., it was on 3 separate industry sites. By 10, Corvell had issued a tersely worded statement confirming the suspension and the initiation of a third-party audit. Dad read it over breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, the morning light making the kitchen warm and gold, with the expression of a man reviewing a shipping manifest. "He did it to himself," he said. "I just asked the right people to look in the right places." Harlan called at 10:30 with his preliminary findings, and I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad while Dad put him on speaker. The outline was this. Daniel had been siphoning approximately $8,000 to $12,000 per month since his promotion through a network of false vendor invoices, a total of roughly $47,000 over 4 months. The funds had been distributed across 3 accounts, one of which had Evelyn's name on it as a secondary holder. The prenuptial amendment was drafted by Hargrove Legal Associates, Evelyn's cousin's firm, and contained 3 clauses that Harlan described as aggressively, and in my professional opinion, fraudulently constructed, designed to transfer community property under the guise of asset protection. The deed transfer request had been submitted to a third-party title company, but not yet processed, a fact that would protect me, but only if I acted quickly. How quickly? I asked. 24 hours would be ideal, Harlan said. I've already filed an emergency injunction. First twist, confirmed in writing, Evelyn wasn't peripheral. Evelyn was the architect. Her fingerprints were on the account, on the amendment, on the legal firm. Daniel hadn't hatched this plan alone in his locked office. He'd hatched it with his mother over what I imagined were the same Sunday dinners where she'd once told me how lucky I was to have her son. Evelyn called at 11 a.m., her voice an instrument of calculated outrage. "What have you done to my son? He called me crying. He's been suspended, they're talking about criminal charges, and you ran to your father like a child and sicked him on our family." "Evelyn," I said, "you were on the call. You helped design the amendment. Your name is on the account." A pause that she didn't fill. "Harlan's already included you in the documentation. I'd suggest you speak to an attorney." The silence on her end was a very different kind from the comfortable silences I'd grown up with in this house. It was the silence of someone who has just understood that the trap they set has instead closed on them. She hung up. Part 7. 3 confrontations. 3 devastations. The first confrontation. Our house. I drove to Elmwood Lane at 1 p.m. with Harlan's documents in a folder and my father's attorney's number dialed and ready. The slush from the previous night's snow had turned to gray mush, tire tracks cutting dark lines through the dirty white. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Cream siding, hanging fern baskets, winter bare now, string lights dead on the porch rail. Home. My home. Daniel answered in his undershirt and yesterday's trousers, stubble thickening toward beard, eyes so bloodshot and hollowed that he looked a decade older. The house behind him was a study in accelerated decline. Takeout containers on the coffee table, his work jacket crumpled over the back of the sofa, the TV playing some cable news channel at low volume, the sound of a world continuing while his small piece of it collapsed. Claire. Relief and desperation tangled in his voice as he reached for me. I sidestepped, walked past him into the kitchen, and placed the folder on the table. "Sit down, Daniel." He sat, pulled the folder toward him, opened it with fingers that were visibly unsteady. I watched his face as he processed the injunction, the emergency deed protection filing, the annotated prenuptial amendment with Harlan's flags, the transaction records tracing the $47,000, the account documentation with Evelyn's name. The color left his face incrementally, like water draining from a tank. "I can explain. I don't need you to explain. Harlan has explained everything." I sat across from him. "I need you to understand what happens next. The deed stays in both our names pending divorce proceedings. The joint accounts are frozen pending the fraud investigation. The house will be sold as part of the settlement, and the proceeds will be split according to the original contribution records, which means my father's down payment returns to him, and the equity we built together is split." I paused. "You'll also be paying back the $47,000. That's between you and Corvell, but Harlan will be monitoring." "This is insane." He pushed the folder back. "We're married, Claire. You don't get to just—" "You threw me out," I said, "in the snow without my coat." My voice was even, almost conversational, and I watched this evenness affect him more than any anger could have. He was expecting tears, accusations, The emotional performance he'd always categorized as my weakness. He was getting a woman who had spent the night replacing grief with strategy. "You assaulted me. There are bruises on my arm that were photographed by my father's attorney at 8 this morning as documented evidence. You attempted to fraudulently transfer marital property with the assistance of your mother. You've been embezzling from your employer." I folded my hands on the table. How exactly does insane fit into this picture? He stared at me. Something moved across his face. Not quite remorse, but a reckoning with the particular scale of his miscalculation. Then he grabbed my wrist, the bruised one, the same one, across the table. My hand was already on my phone. 911 was dialed before he processed that I'd moved. Emergency. Prior domestic assault. Attacker on premises. I gave the address with my free hand pulling out of his grip, and by the time he understood what was happening, the operator was already confirming sirens in 2 minutes. He released me, backed away. "Claire, don't... I wasn't going to... Sit down," I said, "and don't touch me again." 2 officers arrived in exactly 4 minutes. I gave my statement with the bruised photographic documentation on my phone, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table in his undershirt with the expression of a man watching his life disassemble itself in real time, too stunned even to perform innocence convincingly. Battery charge filed. He was asked to leave the premises. He left through the front door with a garbage bag of clothes, and I stood in my kitchen, with my hands braced on the counter, and breathed for a long time. The second confrontation, Evelyn's bungalow. I drove to Framingham that evening with Harlan's folder, the late December light already purpling into dusk, the suburbs sliding past in their familiar succession of commercial strips and residential streets. Evelyn's bungalow sat behind its manicured hedges, still neat, still her, the porch light on, smoke from the chimney. The smell of her in the house would be rose and jasmine, and something underneath that I now recognized as calculation. She answered the door with the manner of a woman who has been rehearsing since the morning, chin up, pearls on, arms crossed at the exact angle that communicates injured dignity rather than guilt. "I have nothing to say to you," she announced. "That's fine," I said. "I have things to say to you." I held up Harlan's folder. "Can I come in, or would you prefer to have this conversation on the porch, where your neighbors can hear?" She let me in, jaw tight. The living room smelled exactly as I'd predicted. I laid the documents on her coffee table, the account records, the amendment drafts, the email correspondence between her and Daniel's phone over the preceding 2 months. Harlan's team had pulled 3 months of communication records through the legal process initiated that morning. She looked at them. Her composure held for approximately 45 seconds, long enough to read the first 2 pages, and then it fractured, not into remorse, into fury. "He's my son," she said, voice rising. "I was protecting my son. You were going to take everything from him, the house, the career, and you had your father pulling strings behind the scenes the whole time." "My father," I said evenly, "made 1 phone call 2 years ago. Daniel's been managing a division of a publicly traded company. Whatever strings were pulled are ancient history. Richard Bell doesn't let go of anything." She was on her feet now, and the mask was completely gone. The motherly advice persona evaporated to reveal something harder and more desperate underneath. He wanted Daniel to fail. He wanted to make sure his daughter had a fallback, an escape route, while Daniel had to earn everything on his own. That's not a family, that's a trap. "I hear you," I said quietly. "I hear that you're frightened for your son, and I understand that. But Evelyn," I met her eyes directly, "you helped him steal from me. You're listed as account holder on funds he embezzled. You commissioned a fraudulent legal document designed to strip me of my marital assets. Those aren't acts of love. They're crimes." I closed the folder. "Harlan's documentation has been submitted to the district attorney's office as of this afternoon. What happens next is between you, an attorney, and the DA." She sank slowly back into her chair. The fury drained out of her, leaving something older and more afraid. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want accountability," I said. "Not revenge, just the truth on record." I left her sitting in her floral living room with her pearls and her rose perfume and the specific grief of a woman who has used her love as a weapon and is now reckoning with the wounds it has made. The third confrontation, the glass wall. 2 days later, Daniel was at the police station for questioning in the embezzlement investigation, and I was permitted a brief meeting with him in a consultation room, at my request and Harlan's arrangement. We sat on opposite sides of a table, a paralegal present, everything recorded. He looked diminished in the institutional fluorescent light, smaller somehow than the man who had stood triumphant in the doorway 2 nights before. The navy suit was replaced by a wrinkled button-down. The confident tilt of his head was gone. Harlan had told me before we went in there was a third layer, an executive at Corville, young, junior, from marketing. A dozen text exchanges beginning in October, escalating through November. Not explicitly incriminating, but unmistakably intimate. The tone of early-stage attraction, the architecture of an exit from a marriage that he'd already, in his mind, vacated. I had the printout in my folder. I didn't need it, but I'd brought it. "The marketing executive," I said. He looked at the table. "Was it serious?" A long pause. "No, but it was real." Longer pause. "I was going to leave anyway," said very quietly. Not cruel, just factually depleted, a man too exhausted for any more performance. The plan with Mom, we'd been working on it for months. The amendment, the transfer, the clean break. The other person was, part of the after, not the reason. So I was just an asset allocation problem, I said. He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his face that might have been genuine grief for what we'd been, what he'd chosen, who he'd become in the choosing. "I was tired," he said, "of the shadow, of always being the one who had less. I wanted something that was mine." "You had me," I said. "That was yours." He didn't answer. I stood, smoothing my coat, gathered my folder. At the door, I stopped. "You told me to go back to my daddy," I said, "and you said it like it was an insult." I held his gaze. "My father is the reason I survived your plan. My father is the reason I walked away with my dignity and my home and my name. If loving him and being loved by him is the thing you used against me, then it was never an insult. It was the thing that saved me." I walked out into the corridor and didn't look back. Part 8. The law does its work. The legal cascade unfolded over the following 10 weeks with the methodical precision of an institution built for exactly this kind of reckoning. Daniel pled guilty to 2 counts of embezzlement, reduced from the original 3 through negotiation, and received 3 years of probation, a restitution order of $47,200 to Corville Industries, and a permanent bar from holding a fiduciary role in any publicly traded company. His name was quietly removed from Corville's website. The directorship position was posted for external candidates by the end of the month. Evelyn faced an accessory charge that was eventually reduced to a civil penalty following negotiated settlement, a fine of $18,000 and a lien against the Framingham bungalow. The Hargrove Legal Associates firm was referred to the Massachusetts Bar for an ethics review. The attorney who drafted the amendment, Evelyn's cousin, voluntarily surrendered his license before the review concluded. The divorce was finalized in 11 weeks, an unusually swift timeline that Harlan attributed to the strength of the documentation and Daniel's absence of leverage. The house sold in the spring for $340,000, more than our original purchase price, a Boston market phenomenon that felt almost like the universe overcorrecting. After the mortgage payoff and legal fees, my share was substantial. My father's down payment was returned to him in full. He donated it to a scholarship fund for first-generation business students. I did not ask for alimony. I never wanted Daniel's money. I wanted my own life back, free of the shadow of what he'd tried to make it. The junior marketing executive from Corville, I looked her up once, out of curiosity rather than jealousy. A LinkedIn profile full of professional accomplishments. I felt nothing toward her but a vague and general sympathy. She had very nearly attached herself to a man who was in the process of collapsing, and she'd been spared by the timing. Part 9. The slow architecture of a new life. In the months that followed, I rebuilt in the way that people rebuild after structural damage. Not quickly, not dramatically, but load-bearing beam by load-bearing beam. I moved into a furnished apartment in Jamaica Plain while the house was on the market. A bright third-floor place with exposed brick walls and south-facing windows that let in sun from early morning until late afternoon, the light falling across my desk in a long, warm stripe. I paid for it myself, my salary, my savings, my own name on the lease. I cannot adequately describe the satisfaction of that last detail, my name, and only my name on a document that said where I lived. It felt like the most elementary form of freedom and the most profound. I worked more, not to escape, but because I found that the work, the analytics, the problem-solving, the building of something functional, was deeply comforting in the way that physical labor is comforting after emotional exhaustion. My consulting firm promoted me to senior director, a title that arrived on a Tuesday with no fanfare and no one I needed to thank for it. I saw friends I'd drifted from during the marriage's slow strangulation, women who'd known me before Daniel, who'd watched me bloom and then dim without comment, waiting patiently for me to find my way back. We met for coffee in sunlit cafes where the air smelled of fresh ground beans and cinnamon scones, laughter spilling over tables sticky with syrup residue. One night, over glasses of Malbec at a tapas bar, patatas bravas crisp and spicy, chorizo glistening with paprika oil, my oldest friend, Mia, leaned forward and said, "You look like you again." Like the Claire who climbed that stupid rock wall in college and laughed when she fell. I realized then how much I'd been performing smallness, how much I'd internalized the role of supportive wife at the expense of my own edges. Dad and I fell into a new rhythm, one that felt less like parent-child and more like peers who'd weathered the same storm. Sundays became our ritual again, but evolved. Walks around the lake near his house, the path crunching underfoot with fallen leaves or packed snow depending on the season, discussions ranging from market trends to the best way to sear a steak. He never asked if I regretted the marriage or blamed myself. Instead, he shared stories from Beltec's early days, the betrayals, the boardroom coups, the nights he'd lain awake calculating risks. "Power isn't about being the loudest," he said once, skipping stones across the water, each plink precise. "It's about knowing when to move the pieces you already hold." Harlan became an unlikely ally, sending occasional updates on Daniel's probation check-ins or Evelyn's lien payments with dry footnotes. Subject appears compliant but despondent. I didn't read them for schadenfreude, but for closure. The confirmation that the architecture they'd built to trap me had become their own cage. Spring arrived tentative, then triumphant. Crocuses pushing through mulch like stubborn promises, the air shifting from wood smoke to lilac and wet earth. The house on Elmwood Lane sold in April to a young couple with a toddler, their offer clean and eager. I walked through one last time before closing, the hardwood floors echoing under my steps, sunlight pouring through windows I'd chosen. In the kitchen, I traced the faint outline where the vase had shattered. Terracotta dust long vacuumed, but the memory etched permanent. I left a note in the pantry for the new owners. "The oven runs hot. Set it 25 degrees lower. Welcome home." With my share of the proceeds, I bought a one-bedroom condo overlooking Jamaica Pond. A sliver of water view through trees, morning light dancing on ripples, the balcony just wide enough for 2 Adirondack chairs and a herb garden. I filled it deliberately. Bookshelves groaning with analytics, texts, and novels, a workshop table for sketching interior designs I'd always wanted to pursue, a coffee maker that gurgled with the same rich aroma as our old one, but now solely mine. Claire Bell Designs launched quietly in June. My first client, the wife of a Corvell VP needing a fresh start office. Irony not lost, but fuel. Word spread through networks Dad's name opened, but I now navigated solo. Sleek home offices for remote execs, cozy family nooks for burned-out parents, each project a reclamation. Echoes of the fallen Daniel surface sporadically, fragments filtered through mutual contacts or online whispers. By summer, he'd relocated to Cleveland, entry-level sales at a widget manufacturer, the 6-figure directorship a ghost. Probation required weekly counseling. Photos from a holiday newsletter showed him thinner, eyes hollowed, smiling. Forced, beside Evelyn at a generic family photo op. She'd sold the bungalow to cover fines, downsizing to a condo in a complex with peeling paint and shared laundry. Their emails to Harlan, pleas for leniency, offers to make it right, went unanswered by me. I'd filed them in a box marked past, unopened since. Twist 4 emerged in July, courtesy of Harlan's routine check. The marketing exec had sued Daniel civilly for emotional distress. After discovering the embezzlement scope, her career stalled by association. Texts she'd subpoenaed revealed his promises, new life together post-divorce, crumbling under fraud exposure. She won a settlement. He flipped burgers weekends to pay it. Not karma's hand, but consequences' slow grind. I felt no triumph, only the quiet validation of patterns recognized too late. His resentment wasn't of Dad alone, but of any woman who didn't need rescuing. Evelyn's blueprint, his execution, both undone by their own haste. The porch reckoning, full circle October, marked 1 year since the shove. Dad and I sat on his porch swing as twilight deepened, the same creaking seat where he'd pushed me as a child, maple leaves swirling in eddies, grill smoke lingered from burgers, charred edges, juicy centers, honeysuckle faint but defiant in cooling air. Fireflies blinked like errant stars, crickets, a steady chorus. "Regret calling Victor?" I asked, beer bottle sweating condensation onto my palm. Dad chuckled, low rumble. "Victor would have found it eventually. I just turned on the lights." He sipped, eyes on horizon where last light bled orange. "But you did the work. Walked those blocks, gathered evidence, faced them. That's not me, that's you." I leaned back, swaying gentle. He said, "Go back to your daddy like weakness. But you taught me strength isn't solo, it's knowing your line." His hand found mine, calloused grip steady as ever. Proud kid, always. Stars pricked velvet sky. Wind carried lake's briny tang. Freedom distilled. No more shadows. Mine cast long now earned. Epilogue. Chosen horizons. 2 years on, my life hums fuller. Claire Bell Designs employs 3. Interns sketching under my eye. Project stacking from Boston brownstones to Cape retreats. Dad retired fully, tinkering boats at the marina. We sail weekends, salt spray sharp, sails snapping taut. Mia's wedding last month. I caught the bouquet, laughed genuine. Daniel, Ohio diner counter, Evelyn nursing aid shifts, echoes faded. The door slam open vistas. Not loss, but latitude. Final truth, whispered to pond ripples at dawn. He kicked me out thinking victory. My father's call reminded him, family isn't claimed. It's chosen, and I chose mine. Strength inherited, courage seized. The end.